So you mentioned 1980, and that came out in 1980.
Yeah.
That record included the what I call melancholy funk of the title track, thumping funk of the Antinuclear, Shut 'Em Down, which was a hit of sorts. Shah Mat, The Shah is Dead, Checkmate was another funky cut.
Yeah.
To me, unless I'm imagining again, I thought I heard a little Billy Preston influence.
Totally. I was definitely channeling my Billy Preston on that, you know, as far as the gospel, you know, the gospel influences. Yeah. And that was, you got it. I mean, that was it. You know, we're talking about the Shah of Iran, you know, and you know, an Islamic country, and I thought it would be kind of interesting to overlay like some gospel tone into that message. So yeah.
So in the last cut, late last night, which unfortunately was kind of ended up being your last album cut, you know, with Gil, but that one was really full of lots of orchestration. You know, I thought that was kind of different from what you had done before. So other than that, I think pretty much everything was intact from Secrets, from what I can tell. But how did 1980, in terms of the process and the songs, differ from Secrets?
I think the main difference was that by the time I got to 1980, Gil had already recorded reference piano and reference vocal for most of the songs, except for Corners, I think. And so when he called me and told me, he said, when he called me and told me that he had been in the studio, he said, I've been having problems with a lot of these songs. I can't go anywhere with them. And I said, well, let me see what you got, you know. And I came in, and the first thing I noticed was that he hadn't bothered to change the tempos on any of the tracks. So they were all pretty much kind of a very slowish tempo that he felt comfortable playing piano with. And you know, like nowadays you could just go into Pro Tools and, you know, pitch it up, I mean speed it up or whatever. But of course we didn't have that option at the time. So my job was to try and figure out how to make things feel like they were different tempos. And that was basically the whole idea behind all of that, you know, all that arrangement. I would have preferred not to have used all that, but it just seemed that it was the only way to mask the fact that everything was kind of slow.
And so you didn't come out with the record in '79. So what was happening with you and Gil and the label and the whole situation toward the end of the '70s decade?
Yeah, we had pretty much run our course. I think that the musically I had evolved to a point that I think Gil didn't necessarily agree with or feel comfortable with, and it became more and more obvious on live shows that I wasn't, you know, that something was not in sync. Things were not in sync, and I know at some point I felt like I needed a break after years of doing like 200 plus gigs a year. I felt that I needed to just step back and maybe have a minute to breathe and write some more songs. Gil, on the other hand, did not want to do that for whatever reason. He felt like he needed to push forward and continue to perform. And so we agreed on a short break, maybe 6-month hiatus, so that I could have a life and he could have a life, and then we could go on and write some more material. But I soon found out, like within a couple of months, that Gil had started performing with the band without me, and so that was, you know, kind of the beginning of the end.
Mm. Were there also some label issues? And we didn't really talk much about the label, but I'm also curious, you know, if there were any pressures in terms of what you guys did creatively, what a single choice might be, trying to push you in a certain direction with particular records?
Sure, sure. Well, I don't think Clive knew what direction he could actually push us into, but he did say that he was expecting hits, and this is what the one thing that he would always say after he auditioned one of our albums. We would sit in his office, and he would say, "Yeah, I really like this stuff. You know, it's really good things, really good material, but I don't hear a hit. Which one is the hit?" And we would say, "Well, you know, there isn't. You know, or you pick it because we don't really care." And so, you know, he did. I think that was an ongoing problem for him. He just wanted a hit. He wanted another bottle, and the fact that we weren't really thinking about that at all was a problem for him. I think he attributed that more to me than to since Gil wrote the bottle, he attributed it to me. You know, the fact that my influence was the one that was causing everything to sound like jazz, and so you know, I think it was part of his agenda to make sure that I was out of the picture at some point. So we felt the pressure, you know, and our manager at that time telling us the same thing. You know, we need a hit. This is your livelihood. You know, what are you guys going to do? You know, when you no longer have a record deal or whatever, blah, 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 blah. So it was, but I mean, it just, you know, we had never gone into it for that. We hadn't gone into it to be famous or to have a hit or anything like that. So it didn't really affect us. You know, I mean, pressure, you can't really call it pressure unless it's working. We didn't really care about that stuff. So, you know, it was what it was. I mean, later on, of course, when you get to be a little bit older and you realize that, oh wow, this is my livelihood. You know, what am I going to do when I don't get any more royalty checks, or you know, what am I going to do when I don't get any more gigs? It happens. You know, you deal with it. I dealt with it by getting a job with the city, and you know, I supplemented my income with that. I never stopped working, but I never stopped performing or writing or producing or any of the things that I do. But I, and as many musicians have to do, they have to supplement their income to make sure that they and their offspring and their families are able to eat.
It's, you know, ironic the way that kind of comes full circle. In a way, I'm thinking about how, you know, when you're a baby, you know, you need to be cared for and all that. And then when you're elderly, you kind of go back. And when you're a musician, you kind of start out doing the small gigs and just kind of, you know, working a day job and trying to get that off the ground. And then when the fame is gone, you kind of, a lot of times have to go back to that.
Yeah, you're back to being a baby, back to being a baby again. Yeah. So, yeah, that's how it happens. And, you know, I don't regret anything.
Well, so Brian, Gil did go on to do a few more records in the early 80s. And, you know, he really kept a very similar sound, I would say. One thing I noticed is maybe the bass was a little more up front.
Yeah.
But, and he had a big hit with a B movie. So what did you think of, you know, his subsequent work in the early 80s?
In the early 80s? Well, I mean, I could definitely, I could hear the absence of what I added to it, but and a lot of people did. I mean, a lot of people would mention to me, they would say, well, it doesn't sound the same. And I said, well, and a lot of people didn't know why. You know, a lot of people would say that to me, not realizing that they were talking to me. You know, and I mean, obviously, if you remove a key member of any organization, the organization changes. And so, you know, Gil's writing was still impactful, and it was still powerful. So, you know, B movie was, you know, I think it was something that I would have expected him to have done in honor of Ronald Reagan. And you know, for instance, a song like "Gun" or a song like Give Her a Call, for instance. I mean, these are songs that I am not surprised, at hearing him write. Message to the Messengers. I was happy when I heard him do that. I thought that was important. I think that hip hop artists do have a responsibility. They've always had a responsibility to speak out. But I think they have. I mean, I think that there are a lot of hip hop artists that. I mean, he was saying this at a time when there was Chuck D and Public Enemy. Excuse me. So, yeah, I mean, I think some listened and some didn't. I mean, there's always going to be some artists who feel the responsibility to speak the truth, and then there are others who don't. I mean, that's not going to change, and it hasn't changed. We have plenty of artists today who are still representing truth as they see it.
Brian, could you describe to me, when things were at their best with you guys as a duo, what might it have been like to hang out with you two in the studio? What was the dynamic and creative process like?
So, I mean, we had written all of the songs. We didn't believe in wasting time in the studio writing, creating things. I mean, there were some artists who had the approach of going into the studio and then figuring out what they were going to do. We just never felt like we had that luxury. And plus, we spent so much time writing already that we didn't need to. So we would rehearse our band, or we would rehearse together. Whatever it is that we were doing before we went in. So we had a pretty good idea of what we wanted to do. Then came the experimentation, particularly in the later albums, where I would jump on the synthesizer bass and try and come up with a decent bass line. And then we would add more and more pieces to it. But I was open, we weren't rigid about anything. We kind of let the flow of ideas go through us, and whatever happened. I mean, I've always felt that an accident, there is no such thing as an accident in the studio, regardless, and you have to treat each event in the studio as something that could be valid. And so we had a lot of fun. I mean, that was my favorite place to be. The studio was my favorite place to be. I don't think it was Gil's favorite place to be, but it was definitely mine. And I spent as much time as I could.
Where did the sort of album concepts come from, in terms of, what they might look like? Were you guys involved in that, or was it more of the label? How did that develop?
We were usually involved in it. I mean, we had friends who were artists, and we would ask them to do covers. Like the album cover on "It's Your World" is actually something that was done by. No, let me go back. It wasn't "It's Your World." I can go back to "Winter in America," where the inside album was actually a circular collage that was done by one of them. Can you hear all that in the background?
A little.
Yeah. Hold on. So that circular collage that was done that was on the inside cover of Winter in America actually is something that a good friend of ours' mom had done based on the stories in the album of Winter in America. And the outside cover was done by a good friend of ours named Eugene Coles, an artist. The album Bridges was done by a friend of ours named Stan Burnside, who was a college buddy of ours. So yeah, we had album covers that kind of represented who we were and who our friends were, and just that was an important part, as well as the liner notes that we took great care to write. Um, I've always been a big fan of liner notes. One of my big beefs against MP3s and CDs
Yep.
is that, I mean, there's got to be a way to bring liner notes back, even if there is no physical item. You know, I think that liner notes still provide a very important piece to the creation of to the album itself, to understanding what you're listening to. And I think in some way or another we need to try and bring we need to bring liner notes back in some form.
I'll sign the top of that petition.
Yes, sir. Yeah.
So, you know, my girlfriend at the time and now wife of many years, you know, when I would share music with her, of course, because it's so important in my life. But Gil Scott-Heron was one of the ones that I shared with her, and I thought that she would really appreciate it because she's very big on lyrics, and she couldn't get past his vocals. She did not care for his vocal style, and to me, that's always been one of his greatest qualities. I kind of liken it to Jimi Hendrix. You know, that it's stylized, it's not got a big range, but it's very heartfelt and it's very unique.
That's right.
What's your take on that?
Well, I think I get it. You know, I mean, I get it. It's kind of a rough, it's a kind of a rough voice, and sometimes it can be very polished, and sometimes it can be very, very harsh or rough. And that was intentional for the most part. Maybe not so much at the beginning, but it was intentional later on. He was able to shift in and out of personas based on the message that he was trying to convey. But I understand. I get it. It's not for everybody. I mean, it's the one good thing I can say about his voice is that you either like it or you don't. There's no in between, and that's how he was as a person. You either liked him or you didn't, and there was really no in between.
Do you feel that the body of work from the 70s has received its just due? You know, because to me, I think of, you know, I liken it almost to like Bob Dylan. You know, Bob Dylan wrote all these lyrics that are so, you know, referenced and worshipped in a way, and you know, he, you know, was not an outstanding singer,
right,
but his body of work is amazing. He gets so much credit and so much due. Do you feel that Gil Scott-Heron gets his just due?
I think that over the years he has come to be respected as a primary influence on musical literature, if you will. I personally believe that as a writer, he deserves to be put in the pantheon of great 20th century literary figures. He definitely compares in many ways. He was a very skilled writer, and I think people have come to understand that over the years.
Well, one of my big beefs, Brian, is as far as I know, there's no comprehensive box set of all of that work. You know, where is that?
There's so much there is so much controversy and so much brouhaha over the who owns what, and you know, and it's I wonder if it'll ever happen. You know, I just think that it's the business. You know, Gil's business was kind of in shambles, as you can imagine. By the time he passed away, and so it's going to take a Herculean effort to bring all of these things together. Yeah,
that's a travesty. Hopefully, it'll work itself out eventually.
Hopefully, yeah.
Getting back to your work post Gil, you know, you did some work with people like Kool and the Gang, George Benson, Roy Ayers, who you're more recently doing work with, and Will Downing. Speak to some of that work and what you're proud of there.
Well, I'm proud of all of it. I mean, I have done. I've worked with on the road with Bobby Humphrey and Phyllis Hyman. I did an album with Cool and the Gang. I did work with, like you said, Will Downing and also Gwen Guthrie. I've also done tracks with like Alabama 3, Les Nubians, and Roy Ayers. Um, I've done a lot of things that I'm proud of. Everything I try to do to the best of my to the best of my ability. And like I said, I think it's the fact that my um, the broad spectrum of music that I listen to has prepared me for those things. Now I'm very proud of what I've been able to do to accomplish. And I work now. I'm working with Charnette Moffett, the great jazz bass player, um, and a young violinist by the name of Scott Tixier, and I often mix it up and work on things together. I've worked with M1 from Dead Prez and Gregory Porter, and so I'm always reaching out to work with new artists to expand, as I said before, to expand who I am, and my boundaries and what I can learn and accomplish.
And I guess when the new millennium came in 2000, you decided to finally put out your first solo record, right?
Yeah, it took a minute. It wasn't an easy process, but I had some great young artists to work with, and it came together. And I'm looking forward to doing something similar soon. I'm working on a tribute to one of my greatest influences, McCoy Tyner. So that's going to be interesting, daunting, but a favorite project.
When you also did the M1 project, Evolutionary Minded, just a few years ago, that seemed like a very ambitious project. I mean, you had just some of the names, Stanton Moore from Galactic, and Blackbird McKnight from the Headhunters, and P-Funk, and Chuck D, and Bill Summers, and that must have been a fun project to do.
It was yeah. I mean, it was a dream that I had to try and get some of the younger artists who had openly declared that their influences, some of their influences were music that Gil and I had done, to come together and try to give their take on some of that music. It's kind of what I'm doing, what I'm thinking of doing with McCoy's music. It's not going to be me doing McCoy Tyner's music. I mean, obviously, because I'm nowhere in the same ballpark. But what it is McCoy's music filtered through my spirit and through my eyes and through my ears. And this is what I had hoped for when working with those artists, and that's exactly what happened. And I'm proud of the work that they did. Martin Luther and Gregory Porter, and M1 and Dead Prez, Chuck D, Blackbird, like you mentioned, Blackbird McKnight, and Stanton Moore, with intercuts from Bobby Seale, and it was just it was a great project. Yeah, I'm proud of it. I'm happy that it was done.
Yeah, there's a ton of music on there too.
Yeah.
So, Gil vanished for about a decade, from the early 80s until the early 90s.
Yeah.
And, when he surfaced to most people, he was kind of a shadow of himself. It was very sad and hard to see. But he came back with an album, Spirits, and you actually guested on that. So I heard you in the other interview you did talk about that experience a little bit, but what did you contribute to that? And, did you also keep in touch with him at all after that?
No, that was actually, we hadn't even been in touch yet at that point. We had fell out of touch. We had fallen out of touch in 1980. And that particular song had been in the can from Secrets. And it was a cover of a John Coltrane tune called Equinox. And Gil had written lyrics to it, and we recorded it. We just never released it on tour, but, we didn't have enough space for it. And he took it out of the can and released it on TVT for that Spirits album. So we hadn't actually gotten back in touch until about '94 when we did a gig together at SOBs, and then again in '98 when we did kind of a more extended set of gigs throughout California and a few places in the Midwest and the South, and then one eventful tour that we had in South Africa. Okay.
I saw him in 1993 by himself with the piano at a place called McCabe's in Santa Monica, California.
Yeah.
And I didn't really know. I had no idea what he had been going through before that. And so it was really bracing, to just kind of see him there. And it was in that very intimate environment. It's only like 80 seats there. And he spent like pretty much the whole 80 minutes mostly just talking and going and diverging into things. And it ended up including very little music. So we were kind of baffled what was happening. But I did, bring a record along. I got him to sign it, and that was all good. But it was, frankly, we were disappointed and also concerned at that point.
Yeah, well, I understand. Yeah, a lot of people were concerned, and rightfully so.
So when he passed in 2011, he did a record right before that called "I'm New Here."
Yeah.
What do you remember about hearing that news, and how did it affect you, and what will you remember most about Gil?
Well, I wasn't surprised. I had often wondered, excuse me, I'd often wondered how he was able to survive under the circumstances that he was living in, and it just seemed that he was living on borrowed time. And so when the first I heard was when a New York Times reporter had called me in between a set that I was in between sets of a gig that I was doing, and she asked me for a statement, which I would not give her because I wasn't ready to process it, and I didn't actually speak about it until several months later. The Gil that I knew was nothing like the Gil that I met in the 90s or worked with in the late 90s or early 2000s. So in a sense, I lost my friend a long time before that. And this new guy was not somebody that I particularly cared for, or even or really had anything in common with, except that when we went on stage, we worked together. There was that old chemistry. It lasted for the time that we were on stage or the time that we were playing, and then that was it. So it was the glimpses of the old friend and the old friendship that hardly ever lasted. And so I had actually made peace with that long before Gil had actually physically passed away. And that's kind of what I will remember him as is as the guy that I knew, the guy that I met at in the music room, in the practice room at Lincoln University, with the fro that couldn't get through the door, and the kind of mumbling, insecure type of speaking manner that he had, that would sometimes become extremely clear and extremely pointed when it needed to be. Yeah.
Brian, we touched on this earlier about the thread that runs between funk and jazz.
Yeah.
And there's been so many jazz artists that have, at least tried their hand at funk.
Mm-hmm.
And also it seems, that this same thread goes through a lot of hip hop, in terms of the lyrics. And of course, they've sampled so many of the funk and jazz tracks. What do you feel is the threads that bind these three genres together?
I think that in all of Black music, the one thread that binds them all together is African music. It's rhythm, it's the drum, it's the thing that brings all Black music together. And I mean, it's been that way continually. I don't see it changing. I mean, you can hear African rhythms in every form of American music that has been played since the very beginning, and it will be. I mean, it's conscious and it's unconscious. It's both, but it's what we have. It's what it's basically how we learned to think musically. How we all hear music. We hear it through the rhythm of the drums, and what is the rhythm of the drums but just like a recreation of our heartbeat? So, and the division of the rhythms of our heartbeat. So, yeah, I mean, that's always going to be the basic element, and everything else is just like different toppings and different flavors.
Jazz artists in particular, though, have taken such a beating a lot of times, when they try to do funk, that it's kind of beneath them, or especially if it's, a little more commercial funk and not hardcore funk. But Herbie Hancock's gone through so much of that. Do you think that's fair? I mean, it's
fair when, it's fair when a musician does it just for the numbers. When they do it just to sell records or just to sell product, then it's not fair. Hey. Hold on 1 second. You going for me? Oh, okay. Where you going? Okay. Oh yeah, that's your book.
I'll see you
Wednesday.
What's that?
Huh?
What's today?
It's today, Friday.
Okay.
Wednesday. Or whenever. You just let me know. You can always come.
Okay.
All right. Your mom says we have to talk about. It's my college-bound daughter. She's going to be going to college next year.
Wow, you got a big spread.
I got a spread, yeah. Okay.
So pick it up from talking about, if it's fair for jazz artists to be criticized for, doing the other stuff.
Yeah. So I think it's fair when the musician is not sincere about what he's doing. There are a lot of artists who have tried to dabble in hip hop and and soul and R&B, and you can tell that they never listen to any of it. That they don't really even necessarily like it. They're doing it because maybe their label told them to, or maybe instinctively they felt that it was the best thing for them to do so that they could sell some units. If you're doing it for that, people are going to hear it. They're going to hear the insincerity of it. They're going to hear the inauthenticity of it, and they're not going to gravitate toward it. You know. So, is it fair to say those guys should leave it alone? I totally agree. But for somebody, for somebody like, for instance, Herbie, who I know was totally blown away by Sly, by Sly Stone, or Miles, who was totally blown away by Jimi Hendrix, or somebody like me, for instance, who was like totally blown away by Public Enemy, totally blown away by Diggable Planets, totally blown away by Kendrick Lamar. I mean, it's just like not something, for me, it's not insincere if that becomes a part of who I am. I'm not doing it. It's doing me. It's informing me. It's making me who I am. So I couldn't not do it if I wanted to. For those musicians, and there are many, for those musicians, yeah, it's not fair. It's not fair to say that they shouldn't dabble in those interests, because they're interests. They're genuine interests. They're not tools to sell.
You got to keep it real and honest, and you got to have truth and rhythm.
Yeah. But by the same token, I'm not going to confine myself to one genre either, just because people think that I should. And because there are other artists who would say, you know what, I'm really interested in those things. I'm really interested in hip hop. I had an encounter with an artist like this, and he was really into hip hop, but he felt at the time that he would lose his fan base, if he got involved in it. And in the end, like 6 months after that, another artist came out doing a very similar thing, and it became a huge hit, and it was very well respected in the music community. So you just have to be you. You got to be who you are.
Brian, what are you most proud about concerning your musical accomplishments, and why?
My musical accomplishments, what am I most proud of? I'm most proud of the fact that even at 60, almost 65 years old, that I can still learn. That I can still learn something. I can still be blown away by somebody that I haven't heard it all. I haven't seen it all, and I don't expect that I ever will. I think my biggest accomplishment is that I'm still able to learn, and I'm still incorporating those things into my music, and I'm proud of that. That's it. I mean, for the most part, I'm still growing.
And you talked about continuing to perform some of these other projects you're doing. Is there any chance that people listening or watching this might be able to see you perform somewhere? What's your situation with that? And when you do perform now, do you do any of the songs that Gil used to do the vocals for?
I do, yeah. Sometimes I will do a show called Recollections, in which I found that you mentioned, I think you mentioned the Red Bull Music Academy interview that I did. I found that a lot of younger artists and younger people enjoy listening to the stories about how that music came together, and some of the ideas that surrounded it, and some of the feelings that we were having growing up in that time period. So I've incorporated that within my show. I explain how certain songs came to be and what they mean to me, and about the circumstances, about how they came about. And so I call it Recollections, and it's yeah, I mean, I do that, and then aside from that, when I'm not doing that, I'm working as a sideman in particular right now. I'm doing a lot of work with bassist Charlotte Moffett. So If he's in town, you'll probably see me tagging along, or look for recollections. And you can always stay on top of what I'm doing on Facebook or Instagram or my website, brianjackson.net. From Facebook is brianjackson.official, and Twitter is Brian__Jackson. Same with Instagram. So yeah, there's a few ways that you can stay in touch and see how I'm doing and what I'm doing and where I'm doing it.
Fantastic. And we're so glad that you are continuing to do it and you're still looking to grow and you're still out there. I mean, you're the original authentic item. So keep doing it, man. Keep doing what you're doing.
Thank you, Scott. Keep doing what you're doing too. It's important.
Oh, appreciate it.
Yeah.
With that, it's time to wrap up this edition of Truth and Rhythm. A huge thanks to my special guest, jazz funk soul giant, Mr. Brian Jackson. Thank you again so much, Brian, for sharing your time and experiences. It's been a blast.
Thank you, Scott. Same here.
Also, sincere thank you to our listeners and our viewers. If you're an artist or music industry figure interested in being a guest on this program or a fan wanting to see a particular guest, drop me an email, scottg@funkandstuff.net, and we'll try to make it happen. With that, until next time, on behalf of Brian Jackson from Brooklyn, New York, and Charlotte, North Carolina, this is Scott Goldfine saying, keep on vibrating to the rhythm of the one.